Welcome to Fast Effect Double Speed Magic the Gathering. Here we have Ted on Elves versus Rodney on Mono Black. Reanimator is going to be a tough game one, as we see a Dark Ritual is a much stronger play than Wirewood Symbiote. Putrid Imp allowing Gristlebrand to be discarded, and it is going to be all sorts of card advantage now. Deck is full of fast mana, Lotus Petals, Dark Ritual, free spells like Unmask and Grief. So 7 to 14 cards that you get off of Gristlebrand. Going to have plenty of ability to utilize all of them. This hand being absolutely shredded. A couple of natural orders taken. Gristlebrand. So good he's banned in Commander. Any card that's banned out of any format usually worth considering if it's legal in your format. Now, Archon of Cruelty, the new addition to Reanimator, somewhat new, Modern Horizons 2. This particular card pushes out World Gorger Dragon from these mono black builds. This might actually be a black-green splash. Question is, which is better, Archon or World Gorger Dragon? The ability to win right now, or Archon's ability to kill a fatty, create a stream of card advantage, making your opponent discard cards and, of course, sacrifice creatures while you draw cards. The life loss, not insignificant at all. Now, Animate Dead does make both of these creatures a little bit smaller, giving it -1/-0, so this is not quite lethal. I need to reanimate, bringing back Archon for the final damage. Gristlebrand. Love a magic card. That is really what Reanimator's looking to do. Just get out Gristlebrand as fast as possible. The World Gorger Dragon builds are really the same thing. Typically, you're going to get out Gristlebrand first and then finish off the game with the World Gorger combo. Not so much just moving all in. Some people are kind of afraid to play World Gorger because if it gets blown up, your whole board. Archon of Cruelty here is a much safer option. Much less can go wrong. Of course, the upside is greatly diminished. You do need to actually pass the turn, and you do need to attack in order to win. Now, it is theoretically possible, if we're going to be very precise, you could potentially win without ever attacking. By having your Archon's Cruelty coming back from the graveyard and draining your opponent for 3 in that multiple times, potentially sacrificing your own Archons to Cabal Therapy or having them die to removal. Though I suppose at that point your opponent would not be looking to actually destroy your Archons. They'd be totally safe where they are if they're unable to attack due to a card like Ensnaring Bridge. Common burn sideboard card, but overall doesn't see a ton of play. So attacking with creatures, not really that big of a problem right now. Passing the turn, allowing your opponent to potentially win on their turn is kind of the bigger concern, but the deck has a absolute mittful of discard spells, Unmask, Grief, Thoughtseize, Cabal Therapy. I mean, very often, if you do get a Gristlebrand into play, passing the turn to your opponent means they're going to have basically nothing left. Not a whole lot you can top deck to go along with a whole bunch of nothing. Most of the really powerful stuff does require a couple of cards. A card like Show and Tell on its own doesn't do anything. You need a card to put in. Ed is mulling. He has found the ley line. Good start for Elves. Also a quasi-mana dork with Birchlore Ranger. And a Thoughtseize. Sees a Vivian. Not Wirewood Symbiote. It's the sect that bounces stuff. That is Elvish Visionary. That's going to get reanimated. Drawing a card. So Rodney essentially cycling a Reanimate. Remember, Leyline only shuts off his graveyard. And hitting your opponent's creatures with your Animate Deads and Reanimates, a important pivot to be aware of. Playing Delver of Secrets and Dragon Rage Channelers and those type of cards. Delver, the better option. Street Wraith, for example. Or a whole bunch of creatures in this format, and Reanimator will, if it needs to, strip them out of your hand and back. Green Sun Zenith X equals 1. Or it's just kind of parity at this point, just some 1/1s staring at each other. A Nettle Sentinel could potentially break through. This Putrid Imp, never going to have Threshold, thanks to this Leyline. We do see the Bayou in play, meaning that Reverent Silence could possibly be top decked at any point. Get rid of this Leyline, opening up the graveyard. Very ugly, very fast for Elves if that is the case. That a Grief hitting the Planeswalker, leaving just a Gaia's Cradle in hand. Swept Heath, probably going to be able to fetch up a Dryad Arbor. Extra body, at least. Nettle Sentinel not going to be able to just recklessly attack. Ted is out of green spells, so it won't be untapping easily. Feels like just a matter of time before his deck bails him out here. And a Green Sun Zenith X equals 3. A green mana floating. Interesting. He may have miscounted his mana off of that Cradle, just forgetting about the Dryad Arbor. I'm guessing that's what happened there. Another Nettle Sentinel. Actually turns one sideways. We're in Ranger. That card's actually very welcome right now, as the whole team turns sideways. Scavenging Ooze. Now getting reanimated. This is a little dicey. This is going to get needlessly risky here, as there's creature in the graveyard. The Skoos can become a 3/3. Will potentially just halt the forward progress. Ted is just kind of looking for a natural order. And now a Green Sun Zenith. X equals 1. That's probably be Allosaurus Shepherd. Just going to overrun here. Allosaurus Shepherd easily making his whole squad 5/5s and turning sideways. Ted picks up that second game. That Leyline completely shutting down Rodney's main game plan, and the backup plan of stealing creatures from the opponent. Not a great one versus Elves. I mean, most of the Elves aren't really high impact enough on their own. Scavenging Ooze is about as much as you could hope for. That is not particularly impressive at any point if Elves hits their natural order, or as we saw, Allosaurus Shepherd if they have Gaia's Cradle. It's just going to be over very, very quickly. Not going to be happy to just stare across the table at a whole bunch of tiny creatures. Even the beatdown plan of Grief, not really viable versus a deck with so many creatures. There are times where you can just get a grief into play and just ride it out for a while. Sometimes even force your opponent to answer it, and that potentially opens up a little bit of a window. But not realistic when you're facing down a deck full of mana-efficient creatures, all one casting cost. Nettle Sentinels and the like. Rodney does have answers to Leyline in this list. The green splash. See if Ted mulls to that Leyline. We'll see if Rodney keeps a hand without answers to it. This is the early game right now. Talking about a deck like Reanimator. Winning hands, so important. Crucial decisions. Whether or not to keep. If you are keeping, which card to put on the bottom. All decisions that can literally make or break a match. Well, it's not entirely accurate. They can break the match. Making a misstep in the early game can often be something that just cannot be recovered. Obviously, making a good keep isn't enough to just win the game on its own. You still have to play very tight. But, man, you can throw it all away just by having a hand that's not quite good enough. Rodney throwing his back. Like he's going to be keeping on 6. Ed has his 7 with no pregame. Game 1, total blowout. Game 2, Ted had the Leyline. Eventually overwhelmed the board using Allosaurus Shepherd. There he is. Nowhere near as good at the beginning of the game as he is at the end. We see an Endurance, which is the reason for the keep. A little bit of interaction there. Of course, that is taken. That is a somewhat substantial target for Reanimate effects as well. Definitely better than grabbing 1/1s. Allosaurus Shepherd turns sideways. Thoughtseize. Does mean that cards like Endurance unlikely to do their job. Have multiples of them. Of course, there's Cabal Therapy, which actually targeting Rodney here. Able to discard, knows that the coast is clear. I believe there's one draw step in between there, so just praying that another Endurance wasn't drawn. And he goes ahead to make an Archon. When that shows up, Ed's losing a creature and a card from hand and some life, and the race is on. Now, the hand's already had a hole poked in it, thanks to the discard. Need to outdraw this Archon. A lot to ask. Guy's Cradle. Do a Glimpse. Well, this could certainly do the job. We're in Ranger. He triggers to draw. Taps for 2. Way of keeping up with this repeatable trigger. So it only needs to repeat twice to wrap things up. Going to be 8 and 8. Well, I guess 3 times because of the -1 from the Animate Dead. Able to swing for 5 and then a -3 life. So it is 2 swings. Fight. That turns it into 2 swings instead of 3. Ball Therapy flashes back. A blind Cabal Therapy there. Interesting. Future Imp did represent lethal on the following turn. Not a lot going on here. Does not want that fetch land. Using a point of life for it. Will not do. Bot sees. This point pretty much needs to be a natural order. Order into a Traxa would be an absolute haymaker. Like Ted's going to have 2 draws to make it happen. Plus 3 life each turn from this Archon. Keeping Rodney's life total very high. It was also an animate dead, not a reanimate. No initial life investment. Two creature. Floor Ranger. Hacking. Looks like keeping 1 card in hand. That card's going to go to this Archon. Not make out what that is. Let me know if you can tell in the comments. Down to just 1. Like you'll have a top deck. Even a Traxa won't help though because the 3 damage or the 3 life loss. And cannot get there. Nothing to stop the incoming trigger from Archon as Reanimator. Man, like you really need that ley line in this matchup. This is a tough one.